Hey guys. Tonight we start somewhere you probably wouldn't expect. In the middle of Henry Ford's brain around 1908. Not literally. Of course. If we were inside there, we'd probably be ankle deep in motor oil and questionable coffee. But in this moment, you're pacing his study alongside him, feeling the carpet wear thin under your shoes. The lamp casts a warm, flickering glow, but it's not enough to soften the look of restless calculation in his eyes. He's been up for hours, maybe days in spirit, chasing a single stubborn thought. A car for everyone, not just for bankers in their fine coats or railroad barons with their smug cigars, but for farmers, schoolteachers, and maybe even the fellow selling apples on the corner. And here's the kicker. You probably won't survive this. Because back then, traffic safety was about as reliable as a paper umbrella in a hurricane. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop a comment with your location and what time it is right now. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is still limping out of the Gilded Age. And America is restless. Factories are swelling. Cities are booming. And the sound of progress is half steam whistle, half human cough. You sit with Ford as he sketches yet another outline for what he calls a universal car, its lines plain, its mechanics forgiving, its price so low even the small-town preacher might afford one. He mumbles about vanadium steel, about interchangeable parts, about lowering costs without lowering quality. It's not romantic talk. It's practical, almost stubborn, but there's a strange warmth in his conviction, as though he believes he's inventing not just a machine, but a bridge between worlds. You glance at the clock. It's past midnight, but Ford isn't tired. He's already pacing again, pausing now and then to adjust a bolt on a desk model. Outside, the Michigan wind taps against the window like it's trying to join in. Historians still argue whether Ford was a true visionary or just the most stubborn mechanic who ever lived. Maybe he was both, somewhere between the creak of the floorboards and the scratch of his pen. You start to notice the odd details. The uneven stack of newspapers with headlines about labor strikes and steel prices. The chipped enamel mug with a faint ring of tea at the bottom. The way his jacket still smells faintly of the workshop. That tea ring, by the way, will matter later. Though right now, Ford doesn't give it a thought. His mind is racing ahead to factories that don't yet exist. To lines of men and machines moving in sync. To a world where time itself is measured not by church bells but by the clatter of tools. There's a restlessness in the air tonight. As though the room itself knows something is about to happen. You lean against the wall, listening to him mutter about how most cars are too fragile, too expensive, too elitist. The common man deserves something different, something he can rely on through dust, rain, and the occasional cow in the road. Ford keeps saying it should be simple enough to fix with a wrench and some string, and you realize he's not joking. A stray draft sneaks in through the window gap, carrying the faint smell of coal smoke from nearby factories. Somewhere out there, in the dark streets, horses are still pulling carriages past gas lamps. Ford's Model T doesn't yet have a name. It's just an idea with grease under its fingernails. But you can already feel it breathing in his mind, as if it's waiting for the signal to wake. And you, standing there, are about to witness the spark that will not only change how people travel, but how they eat lunch, take breaks, and live their working days. You just don't know it yet. You step outside Ford's study and into the real world of the early 1900s. A world where the horse is still king. The streets are alive with the rhythmic clop-clop of hooves on cobblestones. The occasional impatient snort, and the unmistakable smell of, well, Let's just call it organic street decoration. You dodge a puddle that might be water but probably isn't, and you realize this is transportation for most people. Slow, messy, and weather dependent. The car, at this point, is a novelty, a shiny toy for the rich, a noisy intruder to everyone else. You watch one sputter past, its driver wrapped in more scarves than a Victorian ghost, while pedestrians shake their heads. It's loud, it's unreliable, and it costs more than a small house. The idea of owning one feels about as realistic as buying your own hot air balloon. In rural towns, the horse is more than transport. It's status, livelihood, and a partner in work. The local blacksmith is still the beating heart of many communities, hammering out shoes and mending wagons. Farmers hitch their teams for a trip to market, while children walk to school carrying tin lunch pails, dodging the occasional splash from a cartwheel. It's slow living, but it's also all anyone knows. Historians still argue whether people actually wanted a faster, cleaner way to get around or if the car was simply forced into their lives by relentless marketing and progress fever. But here, in this moment, you can feel how alien Ford's dream must sound. He's talking about a machine that doesn't eat hay, doesn't leave manure in the street, and, most suspicious of all, can take you to the next town without needing to rest. You wander through a bustling Detroit street market where horses stand tethered outside shops, flicking their tails against flies. Merchants shout prices for apples and onions, and the air smells of coal smoke mixed with bread. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the sharp pop-pop of an automobile backfiring, followed by the startled whinny of a horse. People turn to look, some with curiosity, others with open irritation. The machine vanishes around the corner, leaving a faint smell of gasoline in its wake. You stop to watch a carriage repairman patch a wheel. His hands blackened with tar and dust, he works with a practiced ease, as though this skill will always be in demand. Little does he know, in less than a decade, this job will fade into history, along with the man delivering ice by horse-drawn wagon and the lamplighter who climbs poles at dusk. Ford, meanwhile, is still at his drafting table, sketching something that could upend all of this. You picture him stepping into this street, dodging horses and carts, and seeing not just inconvenience but opportunity. Where most people see the chaos of traffic, he sees a pattern that could be reshaped into order. A moving puzzle where the right piece, at the right price, could change everything. A vendor hands you a warm cup of tea from a battered tin pot. It's slightly bitter, a little metallic from the cup, but it warms your hands. Funny thing, tea will somehow survive every industrial change coming, even if the way you drink it is about to be timed, scheduled, and possibly shortened. But for now, no one's watching the clock. You take your time, sip slowly, and watch a world still running on muscle, hay, and habit. The sun dips lower, the street lamps flicker on, and a few early automobiles rattle by like restless insects in a world of draft horses. You know they're the future, but right now they're outnumbered 100 to 1. Somewhere in the city, Ford is telling anyone who'll listen that this will change. And soon, you step outside Ford's study and into the real world of the early 1900s. A world where the horse is still king. The streets are alive with the rhythmic clop-clop of hooves on cobblestones, the occasional impatient snort, and the unmistakable smell of, well, let's just call it organic street decoration. You dodge a puddle that might be water but probably isn't. And you realize this is transportation for most people. Slow, messy, and weather-dependent. The car, at this point, is a novelty, a shiny toy for the rich, a noisy intruder to everyone else. You watch one sputter past, its driver wrapped in more scarves than a Victorian ghost, while pedestrians shake their heads. It's loud, it's unreliable, And it costs more than a small house. The idea of owning one feels about as realistic as buying your own hot air balloon. In rural towns, the horse is more than transport. It's status, livelihood, and a partner in work. The local blacksmith is still the beating heart of many communities, hammering out shoes and mending wagons. Farmers hitch their teams for a trip to market, while children walk to school carrying tin lunch pails, dodging the occasional splash from a cartwheel. It's slow living, but it's also all anyone knows. Historians still argue whether people actually wanted a faster, cleaner way to get around or if the car was simply forced into their lives by relentless marketing and progress fever. But here, in this moment, you can feel how alien Ford's dream must sound. He's talking about a machine that doesn't eat hay, doesn't leave manure in the street, and, most suspicious of all, can take you to the next town without needing to rest. You wander through a bustling Detroit street market where horses stand tethered outside shops, flicking their tails against flies. Merchants shout prices for apples and onions, and the air smells of coal smoke mixed with bread. Somewhere in the distance, you hear the sharp pop-pop of an automobile backfiring, followed by the startled whinny of a horse. People turn to look, some with curiosity, others with open irritation. The machine vanishes around the corner, leaving a faint smell of gasoline in its wake. You stop to watch a carriage repairman patch a wheel. His hands blackened with tar and dust, he works with a practiced ease, as though this skill will always be in demand. Little does he know, in less than a decade, this job will fade into history, along with the man delivering ice by horse-drawn wagon and the lamplighter who climbs poles at dusk. Ford, meanwhile, is still at his drafting table, sketching something that could upend all of this. You picture him stepping into this street, dodging horses and carts, and seeing not just inconvenience but opportunity. Where most people see the chaos of traffic, he sees a pattern that could be reshaped into order. A moving puzzle where the right piece, at the right price, could change everything. A vendor hands you a warm cup of tea from a battered tin pot. It's slightly bitter, a little metallic from the cup, but it warms your hands. Funny thing, tea will somehow survive every industrial change coming, even if the way you drink it is about to be timed, scheduled, and possibly shortened. But for now, no one's watching the clock. You take your time, sip slowly, and watch a world still running on muscle, hay, and habit. The sun dips lower, the street lamps flicker on, and a few early automobiles rattle by like restless insects in a world of draft horses. You know they're the future, but right now they're outnumbered 100-1. Somewhere in the city, Ford is telling anyone who'll listen that this will change. And soon, you're back in Ford's study now, leaning over that battered coffee-stained desk. The wood is scarred, like it's been through a bar fight with a toolbox. Papers are stacked at precarious angles, blueprints curling at the edges, and a half-empty pot of tea is cooling by the window. You notice how the surface is cluttered, but there's an order to it. Wrenches in one pile, sketches in another, bolts arranged in a way that almost looks like some private code. Ford sits hunched forward, his pencil scratching across a large sheet of drafting paper. You catch glimpses of the lines. Straight, clean, and purposeful. There's nothing ornamental about them. This is not a man designing a toy for the rich. This is someone stripping a machine down to its bones so it can survive mud, frost, and the occasional unskilled driver with more enthusiasm than sense. On the far corner of the desk lies a small wooden model, barely the size of a shoebox, with tiny wheels and a crude steering tiller. It looks like a child's toy, but Ford studies it like it's a sacred text. He spins one of the wheels, watching it turn, muttering about axle clearance and weight distribution. Historians still argue whether Ford's genius was in engineering or in simplifying things enough for mass production. The truth probably sits somewhere in between. Right now, you can see his focus isn't just on making the car work. It's on making it work for everyone. That means fewer parts to break, materials that can take a beating, and an engine you could coax back to life with a screwdriver and maybe a bit of luck. You lean over his shoulder and smell the graphite of the pencil, the faint tang of oil from the workshop on his sleeves. The sketches are peppered with numbers, gear ratios, wheel diameters, fuel efficiency estimates. Every so often, he pauses to sharpen the pencil with a small pocket knife, sending shavings spiraling onto the desk. He doesn't notice them piling up. There's a half-eaten sandwich next to the blueprints. Bread gone stale, cheese beginning to sweat. You're not sure if he forgot about it or if he's just fueling himself on pure stubbornness tonight. The tea from earlier is still there, leaving a faint ring on the blueprint beneath it. It's funny, you keep noticing tea in this story, like it's a background actor waiting for its big scene. He pulls open a drawer and you spot a notebook labeled cost calculations. Inside, rows of neat handwriting list steel prices, labor hours, and estimates for parts. Some numbers are circled, others crossed out with impatient slashes. He taps his pencil at one entry. Target retail price, $850. You don't need to know 1908 economics to understand. That's cheap enough to rattle the entire industry. Ford stands abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, you hear the muffled sounds of Detroit at night. A distant train whistle, the faint clop of hooves, the hiss of steam from a nearby factory. He stares into the dark like he's watching a movie no one else can see. Lines of cars moving out of a building in perfect rhythm. Men at workstations doing the same motion again and again. Tea mugs set down at exactly the same minute each day. You realize something. This isn't just about building a car. This is about building a system. A way of bending time and labor into a predictable, profitable shape. You feel both impressed and a little unsettled. He turns back to the desk, grabs a fresh sheet of paper, and begins drawing again. This time, not just the car, but the way it will be made. Arrows, stations, and little sketches of men at benches start to take shape. It's as if the first seeds of the moving assembly line are sprouting right in front of you. Somewhere in the quiet, you hear the faint creak of his chair and the scratch of pencil on paper. Outside, the world still runs on horses. In here, the future is unfolding in pencil lines and tea stains. You're standing in the dim, drafty space of the Piquette Avenue plant in Detroit. It smells faintly of fresh-cut wood, machine oil, and the sharp tang of metal shavings. The windows are tall and grimy, filtering in pale daylight that streaks across the dusty floor. Somewhere nearby, a hammer rings out against steel in a steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the building. It's 1908, and for the first time, you watch the Model T roll out. It's not flashy, no gleaming brass trim or ostentatious paint. The body is simple, practical, painted in a dark shade that won't scream for attention but will hide dirt well. It sits higher off the ground than other cars of the day, giving it enough clearance to handle rutted roads and the occasional rural trail that's more mud than earth. Ford stands near the car, his hands in his pockets, rocking on his heels like a man who's both proud and impatient. Workers hover nearby, wiping their hands on aprons, exchanging nods. This is no ordinary machine to them. It's something they've built piece by piece, with bolts tightened by calloused fingers and panels fitted by hand. You take in the details. The spindly wheels with their wooden spokes, the upright windshield, the hand crank jutting from the front like a stubborn invitation to the driver. This is not a car that starts with a delicate turn of a key. It demands a bit of wrestling, a few muttered words, maybe even a sore shoulder if you're unlucky. A worker climbs into the driver's seat, his boots creaking against the wooden floorboards. He grips the steering lever, because at this point, it's more of a tiller than a wheel, and gives the crank a sharp spin. The engine coughs, hesitates, then roars to life with the kind of loud, unapologetic noise that makes horses down the street flick their ears in alarm. Historians still argue whether this moment marked the true birth of the modern automobile. But standing here, it feels significant. This isn't just another rich man's plaything. It's built to endure, to be fixed with basic tools, to work as hard as the people who'll own it. You notice a few quirks. The pedals are arranged in a way that would confuse any modern driver. Brake, reverse, and clutch all operate differently than you'd expect. The gas is controlled by a lever on the steering column. It's as if the car itself is daring you to figure it out. Like some mechanical puzzle. But once you do, it'll carry you farther and faster than any horse ever could. Ford takes a step closer, running his hand along the fender. You can almost hear the silent calculations in his mind. Not just about this single car, but about how to make thousands more exactly like it without driving costs sky high. Right now, every Model T is assembled by skilled craftsmen, each with their own pace and methods. That will have to change. A group of curious onlookers, shop owners, local journalists, and a few skeptical carriage drivers gathers near the open door. One man mutters something about contraptions and gimmicks, while another asks the price. When they hear it's significantly lower than most cars on the market, eyebrows rise. You can see it, the first crack in the wall of skepticism. The driver eases the car forward, the wooden wheels crunching over the dirt outside. Sunlight spills over the hood as it moves down the street, turning heads and drawing a few children into a jog alongside it. You follow, feeling the shift in the air. Something about this moment hints that life will never quite be the same. The Model T doesn't look like much to future eyes. But in 1908, this is a working man's promise on four wheels. Somewhere behind you, Ford is already thinking about the next one. And the next. And the hundreds after that. The car is here. Now all that remains is to figure out how to build it faster, cheaper, and without losing that stubborn reliability. You're back in the factory a few years later. And the air feels different. Thicker, busier, buzzing with a new kind of energy. The Model T has proven itself on the roads. But now Ford has a bigger problem. Demand is outpacing production. Orders stack up like cordwood. And every week, more letters arrive from dealers begging for shipments. You stand near a workbench as men fit parts together by hand. Each car is still being built start to finish by a small team. Like a group of craftsmen piecing together a fine suit. Except this suit has wheels and a tendency to sputter if you don't treat it right. But Ford is restless. He's been watching, listening, and, most importantly, thinking about time. Historians still argue whether Ford invented the moving assembly line or simply adapted ideas from meatpacking plants, where carcasses traveled along rails while workers performed the same cut again and again. Either way, he's about to take that concept and flip it, because here, the carcass will be a living, growing machine, and the workers will stand still while the car comes to them. You follow Ford onto the factory floor where he's explaining this to his foreman. Why should the men walk to the work, he asks, when the work can walk to the men? The idea lands with a mix of nods and raised eyebrows. Some think it's brilliant, others worry it'll strip the soul out of the craft. The first experiments are clumsy. Workers roll half-built chassis down a track of greased planks, handing them off like a relay race. There are missteps, literally. When someone's foot gets in the way, a wheel falls off mid-roll. A steering column is installed backwards. The place smells of sawdust, oil, and a faint whiff of panic. But slowly, something clicks. You see a rhythm forming. A worker fits the engine, pushes the car forward. Another installs the radiator. Another bolts on the wheels. The motion feels almost hypnotic, like the building itself is breathing in and out. You notice that Ford watches not the cars but the hands. How quickly they move, how efficiently they reach for tools, how rarely they hesitate. A man in a flat cap passes you, carrying a tin mug of tea. He takes a quick gulp before setting it on a shelf, ready to grab again when the next car rolls by. Breaks are already becoming shorter, almost informal, snatched in moments between tasks. No one calls it a tea break yet, but you can feel the pressure. The line is moving, and it waits for no one. There's a moment when Ford steps aside and lets the process run without interference. You watch the first truly moving assembly line take shape. The car travels along, piece by piece, gathering its parts like a snowball rolling downhill. The noise grows into a steady hum of hammers, wrenches, and muttered instructions. By the end of the day, the team has built more cars than they used to in twice the time. They're exhausted, but there's a spark in Ford's eye, a mix of satisfaction and calculation. This is just the beginning. You walk out into the cool evening air, the sound of the line still ringing in your ears. Somewhere down the street, a Model T sputters to life, carrying a family home from the factory gates. You realize that Ford's moving work idea is more than a mechanical tweak. It's the first step in reshaping not just how cars are built, but how people will work, rest, and live for decades to come. You come back a month later, and the factory floor is almost unrecognizable. The rough plank track is gone, replaced by a proper chain-driven conveyor. It snakes through the building like a mechanical river, each station marked with chalk numbers on the floor. The pace is deliberate, slower than you expected, but it never stops. The workers no longer wander to fetch parts. The parts come to them. Bins of bolts, stacks of fenders, and crates of spark plugs sit within arm's reach. If a man takes 2 steps in any direction, it's 2 steps too many. You notice something else. Each worker now does only one job. Bolt this, tighten that, fit the same part 100 times a day. Mainstream history will tell you this is efficiency incarnate. But from where you're standing, it's also monotony turned into an art form. A young guy at Station 7 fastens the same 2 nuts onto the same bracket over and over. His hands move so automatically he might as well be sleepwalking. And maybe he is. He blinks slow, takes a sip of tea from a chipped mug, and doesn't even break rhythm. This is where it starts. The shift from a craft to a process. You think back to those carriage builders who once fussed over every curve of the frame. Here, no one sees the whole car until it's nearly done. It's like building a story one word at a time without ever reading the page. Historians still argue whether this was liberation, removing the physical strain of moving heavy parts, or whether it was the birth of soul-crushing industrial repetition. What's undeniable is that production numbers leap upward. A single Model T now takes hours instead of days. But there's a cost. The line never rests. So neither can the men. At least not for long. The old midday tea ritual, where you might stand outside, lean against a wall, and let the steam from your cup mingle with the cold air, starts to shrink. Now, tea happens at the station, between cars, maybe in the 10 seconds it takes for the next chassis to slide into place. You keep catching mugs perched in precarious spots, on a toolbox lid, on the running board of a half-built car, even balanced on a pile of tires. You drift toward the end of the line, where finished cars roll down onto the loading floor. It's strangely quiet compared to the hammer and clang of the earlier stations. Here, the cars look complete, almost smug in their newness. They're lined up nose to tail like a row of black beetles, ready to crawl into the wider world. A foreman leans on a clipboard, muttering about throughput and downtime as if the workers were just another machine to adjust. You catch a scrap of conversation about reorganizing shifts to match the conveyor's pace. More hours on the line, fewer interruptions, better numbers. On your way out, you pass Station 12, where an older man is fitting doors. His hands are quick, but his eyes follow you for a moment, as if to say, it's not the same anymore. Then his next door arrives, and the look is gone, replaced by the muscle memory of work that doesn't stop. Outside, the street smells faintly of coal smoke and gasoline. You watch a group of workers leaving together, their lunch tins swinging at their sides. They don't linger, don't chat much, just head home to rest before the next shift. And you can't shake the feeling that the line isn't just moving inside the factory. It's moving through their lives, narrowing the spaces where slow moments, like tea breaks, used to fit. It's early 1914, and you can almost smell the ambition in the air. Well, that, and the mix of oil, hot metal, and a faint burnt toast aroma coming from someone's poorly timed tea kettle. The assembly line has been humming along for months now, but Ford has spotted another problem. Turnover. Men quit at alarming rates. The monotony, the pace, the strain, it all grinds them down. Ford's solution is not to slow the line, but to sweeten the deal. $5 a day. In an era when most men make less than half that, it's practically an earthquake in the labor market. You watch as word spreads, and suddenly the gates are swarmed by job seekers. They're wearing everything from grease-stained overalls to Sunday-best jackets, all hoping to get a spot on the line. Historians still argue whether this was pure generosity or cold-blooded strategy to keep the machines of production well-fed with steady hands. What's certain is that Ford gets exactly what he wants. Workers who are willing to endure the repetition because the paycheck is just too good to pass up. Inside, the conveyor seems faster now. Or maybe you're just imagining it. Each man sticks to his station with renewed focus. You notice that tea drinking has evolved into something covert. A worker at Station 3 keeps his tin mug wedged between two wooden blocks so it doesn't slide off. Another has mastered the art of sipping without ever looking away from his bolts. The line is unforgiving. Miss your task and the whole flow falters. There's a strange side effect of the higher wage. Loyalty, yes, but also competition. Nobody wants to be the guy who slows the pace. Even the brief act of lifting a mug to your lips starts to feel like an act of rebellion. A foreman's gaze sweeps over the stations like a lighthouse beam, and men instinctively hide their tea mid-sip. Still, the money changes lives. You pass a group on their break, an actual scheduled one this time, sharing stories about new shoes for their kids or finally being able to buy a proper winter coat. The tea is stronger, the bread a little thicker with butter. You realize that while the assembly line shrinks the moments in which tea can be enjoyed, the $5 day makes those moments taste richer. Ford himself walks the floor today. He's not tall, but there's a presence about him. Sharp eyes, clipped sentences. He's asking about output rates and accident reports. But every so often he stops to observe a worker's hands. The same way he did back in the experimental days. You get the sense that he's not here to admire the cars. He's here to measure time in movements. And movements in profit. By the end of the shift, the floor is slick with a fine sheen of oil and sweat. The chain still clanks overhead. Even as workers file out, you see one man linger to finish his tea, savoring it slowly despite the foreman's impatient glance. It's a small act of defiance. One sip against the machine's endless pull. Out on the street, snowflakes drift past the lamplight, melting as they touch the warm steel of a waiting Model T. Somewhere inside that car is a door fitted by a man who learned to drink tea without stopping his hands. Somewhere inside the factory is a clock that never stops ticking. The summer of 1915 rolls in hot and sticky, and the factory air feels like it's been bottled from the inside of a steam engine. You wipe your brow before you even step inside, the tang of machine oil already clinging to your nose. The conveyor still moves at its steady, relentless pace. But something is different now. Order. Everything hums with a kind of clockwork precision. The kind that doesn't happen by accident. Ford's managers have tightened every screw in the system. The workday is choreographed down to the second. When you arrive, when you move, when you breathe, and, yes, when you drink tea. Breaks are now officially slotted in. 10 minutes here, 5 there. You'd think this would help. But all it's done is shrink those moments into something almost ceremonial. You sit, you gulp, you go. You watch a man named Harris, thin, wiry, with hands like knotted rope, drop onto a bench for his allotted 10 minutes. His tea is hot enough to fog his safety goggles. But he drinks it anyway. The cup is dented from years of drops and clangs. The enamel chipped like a map of old battles. He takes one long swallow, sighs, and says, "Better than nothing." Then the whistle blows. And he's gone. Back to fitting brake pedals without missing a beat. The system works. At least from a numbers standpoint. Historians still argue whether this rigid scheduling was a stroke of industrial genius or just a polite way to wring every drop of productivity from human beings. You notice that the line rarely stops now. And when it does, it's treated like a crisis. A missing bolt or a jammed chain can send foremen sprinting, clipboards in hand, barking orders like they're managing a battlefield. And yet, despite the control, the human element leaks through. A worker at Station 9, known to everyone as Mac, has perfected a rebellious art, smuggling an extra sip or two between tasks. He times it so perfectly that the car is halfway to the next station before he even lowers his mug. It's a dangerous game, but in a world where the line rules everything, those stolen sips feel like a quiet victory. Outside of tea, the workers adapt in other ways. Some chew licorice to keep their mouths busy when tea isn't an option. Others leave their mugs under the warm glow of the factory lights so the tea stays drinkable longer. You even spot one fellow who's rigged a tiny wire hook on his station to keep his cup within an inch of his hand. Ford may own the line, but the mugs still belong to the men. By late afternoon, the heat inside feels like it's coming from the floor itself. You catch the scent of burnt rubber mixed with strong black tea. Someone's spilt theirs, and it's trickling toward the drain in lazy brown rivulets. A shame, but no one stops to mop it up. The line has no mercy for spilled tea. When the final whistle finally cuts through the din, the men spill into the street like water finding cracks. You follow them, past the loading dock stacked with finished cars, past the smell of cooling metal, into the open air. The evening is cooler now, and a handful of workers linger just outside the gates. Here, without the chain's pull, tea breaks stretch again. Mugs refilled from thermoses, sips slowly in the fading light. The conversations wander from wages to weather to weekend plans. You realize that inside, tea is measured in seconds. Out here, it's measured in stories. And while Ford's system has made the Model T faster and cheaper, the tea, when it's free from the line, still moves at its own stubborn pace. By 1916, the factory feels less like a grand experiment and more like a living organism. Steel bones, conveyor belt arteries, oil for blood. You step inside on a crisp winter morning, your breath mixing with the steam rising from mugs clutched in cold hands. There's no chatter before the start bell, just the shuffling of boots and the occasional clang of a wrench against steel. The men have settled into the rhythm so completely that the line could start itself and no one would be surprised. The tea now comes in two varieties. The sanctioned kind, poured into battered mugs during official breaks, and the outlaw kind, smuggled in during the shift. You see both today. One man, Peterson, stands in the designated break area with his tin mug, steam curling past his cheeks. He stares at nothing, savoring the heat more than the taste. Meanwhile, not 15 feet away, you catch a glimpse of Morales, sly as a fox, sipping from a chipped enamel cup he keeps tucked in a crate under his bench. His eyes flick toward the foreman with every swallow. Ford's production goals have climbed again. The line runs faster now. Fractions of a second shaved off each task like a barber trimming hair. Historians still argue whether the human body can truly adapt to that kind of unending repetition without losing some invisible spark. Some say it's the tea, brief, private rituals, that keeps the spark alive. You notice the quirks that develop in response to the pace. Some workers pour their tea scalding hot so it lasts the entire break, cooling slowly while they drink in measured sips. Others load theirs with sugar, a jolt of quick energy to carry them back to the belt. You overhear one man joking that if Ford could find a way to serve tea on the conveyor itself, he'd do it in a heartbeat, and charges for it too. By midday, the air inside is thick enough to taste dust, grease, the faint sharpness of metal filings. The clang and hum blur into a steady wall of sound, the kind that makes your thoughts feel heavy. The official tea break comes at exactly 1:15. You watch as mugs appear almost magically from hidden spots. Hooks under benches, cloth sacks tied to uprights, even the inside of a spare tire hanging on the wall. It's a kind of collective magic trick, performed daily without fail. One curious fact the company men don't talk about much. Tea break chatter often doubles as problem-solving time. A loose gear, a sticking panel, an odd rattle in the frame. These issues get discussed over tea more effectively than in any formal meeting. Out of earshot of foreman, solutions are shared, shortcuts swapped, and warnings passed along. It's as if tea is not just a drink here, but a medium for survival intelligence. You think back to earlier years, when breaks were chaotic and unofficial, when men drank where they stood. Now, everything is contained, neat, efficient, but at the cost of that ragged freedom. And yet, there's a stubborn comfort in seeing Harris, the wiry veteran, still tipping back his mug with the exact same satisfied grunt he made in 1914. When the shift ends, snow crunches underfoot as you leave. The men fan out into the cold evening, some heading for saloons, others straight home, and in the windows of nearby boarding houses, you spot kettles already steaming, promising that tomorrow's tea, inside the line or out, will be ready. The year is 1917, and war shadows everything. You step through the factory gates and feel it in the air. An unspoken heaviness, like the moment before a storm. The United States hasn't been in the Great War long, but already the factory floor is changing. Men are leaving for the front, and their places on the line are being filled by new faces. Older men, younger boys, and for the first time, women in work overalls, hair tied up in scarves. The rhythm of the line doesn't pause for introductions. The tea break, though, is where the differences show. You watch a young woman named Elsie unwrap a cloth bundle to reveal her mug. Painted china, delicate, a splash of flowers against the gray backdrop of steel. She sips with the same measured care as the others. But you catch her hiding a small biscuit inside her palm, sneaking nibbles between gulps. Across from her, a boy of maybe 16 dunks stale bread into his tea to soften it. Something his father taught him to make it last. Ford's demands haven't eased. If anything, the line runs even harder now. producing not just cars but parts for military vehicles. Historians still argue whether the war sped up the adoption of stricter brake enforcement or if it simply gave the factory an excuse to push workers further. Either way, the clock rules with even less mercy. You hear more talk of tea as medicine now. Workers swearing by strong black tea to fight fatigue. Others adding lemon to ward off the flu, and one old machinist who insists a spoonful of honey before every shift will keep your lungs from rusting. The foremen turn a blind eye to these rituals. Anything that keeps the hands steady is tolerated. One quirky thing you notice this year: mugs start to develop war scars of their own. A chip from a dropped wrench. A crack from being shoved into a crowded tool chest. Tea stains so deep they've become part of the glaze. Mugs become personal history, carried through the day like lucky charms. And yet, despite the churn of workers and the ceaseless motion of the line, the tea break still works its quiet magic. The conversations now are full of letters from overseas, of brothers and friends stationed in France, of rumors about the war's length. One man reads aloud from a letter, his voice steady until it falters, and the group falls silent except for the hiss of steam in the distance. Outside, the streets feel different too. Posters line the brick walls, urging men to enlist, women to work, families to save scrap metal. But in the boarding house kitchens and cramped apartments, kettles still whistle at the same familiar pitch. Tea, here, doesn't care about war or peace. It just asks for boiling water and a bit of time. As you leave the factory in the fading winter light, snowflakes land on your coat and vanish instantly. You can almost hear the workers heading home, their boots crunching through slush, knowing that even in the tight grip of war, the day will end with that same small, steaming comfort in their hands. By 1920, the war has ended, and the factory hums with a strange mix of relief and restlessness. You walk inside and notice the return of some familiar faces, older now, with eyes that scan the floor differently, like they're measuring the place against the things they've seen overseas. New workers are still coming in too, many of them immigrants chasing the promise of steady pay. The hum of the assembly line doesn't care where anyone's been or what they've done. It just keeps moving, tireless. Exact. Tea breaks, though, have taken on a new flavor. Literally, you smell spices drifting through the breakroom air. Cardamom, cinnamon, even the faint whiff of cloves from a tall man named Singh, who brews his tea in a battered copper pot he keeps under his bench. At first, the others joke about it, calling it perfume tea, but before long, you see them sidling up to ask for a taste. One sip, and they nod slowly, as though the warmth goes deeper than just the tongue. The factory is leaner now, but Ford's efficiency drive hasn't slowed. In fact, the company is experimenting with an even more precise schedule, cutting wasted seconds between tasks. Historians still argue whether this was true innovation or simply obsession in a tailored suit. Either way, the tea break remains untouched by these stopwatches. It's still the one point in the day that's measured by human need, not machine rhythm. A quirky new habit has sprung up since the war: tea mug personalization. Workers scratch initials into handles, wrap wire around them for grip, or paint the base with enamel so it stands out in a crowd. One man, Samuels, has glued a small coin to his mug's side. He claims it balances the weight, but admits later it's from the year his son was born. A little talisman to keep him grounded when the line starts to feel endless. Conversations over tea are lighter than they were during the war years. But they're not free of edge. There's talk of prohibition, of speakeasies tucked away in basements, and of the curious fact that some tea is now brewed stronger than before, perhaps as a substitute for stronger spirits no longer legally sold. You can't help but notice that a few mugs smell suspiciously more complex than tea leaves and hot water. The sound of the line restarting after break is almost jarring now, like a sudden gust of wind slamming a door. And yet, you watch the same practiced ritual. Mugs are emptied in the last 30 seconds, set back in their hiding places, and hands return to their posts as though nothing had interrupted the flow. Walking out into the crisp evening air, you hear the muffled laughter of workers heading toward hidden taverns, while others walk home with their mugs tucked under their arms, ready to refill them in the quiet of their own kitchens. The factory might own the hours, but the tea break, it still belongs entirely to them. It's 1925 now, and the assembly line has reached a strange sort of maturity, like a river that's carved its bed so deep it almost can't change course anymore. You step inside and feel that practiced momentum, the sense that the line could keep running even if everyone stopped thinking about it. The clang of tools, the squeak of boots on concrete, the oily smell of hot machinery, it all folds into a steady background hum. Tea breaks have settled into their own rhythm, too, but there's something new in the air. Music, not the ragtime piano from the neighborhood bar, but small, tinny tunes from hand-crank gramophones some workers have smuggled in for break time. One day, you see a group gathered around a machine playing a scratchy recording of Al Jolson. Their tea mugs cradled close as if the warmth of the drink and the music are somehow tied together. By now, the tea break has become more than a pause. It's a kind of cultural exchange. Immigrant workers share blends from their home countries. Smoky Lopsong Souchong from China, mint tea from North Africa, rich black Assam from India. You try to imagine the sensory overload. Steam-carrying scents from half a dozen continents all at once, swirling together in a room no bigger than a city bus. Ford's management has noticed this. Of course, historians still argue whether the company encouraged this quiet camaraderie as a morale boost or simply tolerated it because it didn't slow the line. Whatever the reason, you sense the break rooms becoming one of the few spaces where hierarchy doesn't quite exist. Foremen drink alongside the men they supervise, and the conversation, though careful, sometimes drifts into topics that would never be spoken on the floor. A quirky trend you spot this year: tea trading. Workers swap loose leaves like others swap baseball cards. Someone who favors strong, earthy brews might trade a small paper twist of tea for a lighter, floral type. You even overhear one worker boasting about getting a week's worth of Ceylon tea in exchange for fixing another man's lunch pail latch. The tea break also doubles as an unofficial marketplace now. Alongside mugs and biscuits, there are little tins of sugar for sale, packets of milk powder, even a flask or two that's discreetly offered to those who know the right signal. This quiet economy hums under the official one, hidden but very much alive. You notice, too, that conversations have shifted toward new topics. Radio broadcasts, silent films, the rise of jazz. Someone mentions a man named Charles Lindbergh planning a flight across the Atlantic. Another worker scoffs. That's as likely as putting tea in the gas tank. They laugh, not knowing history's just waiting to prove them wrong. When the whistle blows, there's a comfortable slowness to the way people put down their mugs now, as if they're reluctant to let go of that warmth. The music winds down, the gramophone's handle spins loose, and the assembly line swallows them up again. But you can tell, the next break is already in the back of their minds, as steady and dependable as the turning gears. By 1930, the world outside the factory is wobbling. The Great Depression has rolled in like a slow, unstoppable tide, and it seeps into every corner of life. Even the tea break. You step into the plant and feel it instantly. The chatter is quieter, the mugs held a little tighter, the steam rising from tea seeming almost like a kind of rationed luxury. Inside the break room, the diversity of blends has shrunk. Imported teas are harder to get, and when they do arrive, they cost more than most workers are willing to spend. Instead, you see mugs filled with thin, over-steeped leaves used for a second, or even third, brew. A tin of sugar is passed around carefully, each spoonful measured like it's gold dust milk. A rare treat. Sometimes evaporated milk is substituted, poured from battered cans with a metallic tang. Ford hasn't slowed production. If anything, the pace feels even more relentless. Historians still argue whether this was a sign of resilience or a stubborn refusal to acknowledge the economy's collapse. But the tea break is still there, clinging on, its existence almost defiant. You watch as workers cluster in smaller groups, their conversations turning practical. Where to find the cheapest bread? Which grocer might extend credit? Who's hiring? Even if it's just for a day's work stacking crates. A quirky adaptation appears this year. Pocket tea. Workers carry small scraps of cloth tied with string, each one holding a pinch of leaves. They dunk them into hot water like makeshift tea bags, then hang them to dry for reuse. It's frugal, yes, but also oddly personal. Each little pouch marked with stains and creases unique to its owner. The break room's mood is different now, but not without its sparks of humor. One man jokes that his tea is so weak it might actually make him thirstier. Another quips that if they steeped it any longer, the tea might start charging rent. Laughter still bubbles up. It's thinner, but it's there. You notice, too, that people linger just a little longer after the whistle. Not in defiance, exactly, but in quiet resistance. Taking one more sip, letting that final mouthful roll over the tongue, as if to remind themselves they still have some control over something in their day. And then they step back into the clatter and oil smell of the line. Their faces set, their bodies moving with the same practiced precision. The tea break might be smaller now, leaner, but it hasn't vanished. In a world where so much is uncertain, that daily pause still holds its place, steady as the ticking of a clock. By the early 1940s, the assembly line has shifted gears, literally and figuratively, into wartime production. You walk into the plant now, and instead of Model Ts, the line is churning out parts for Jeeps, engines for military trucks, even bits of aircraft. The air feels tighter, the noise sharper. Workers move with a new kind of focus, and there's a subtle edge to the pace. Everyone knows the stakes are higher than just meeting the day's quota. Tea breaks still happen, but they've taken on a more purposeful tone. The mugs are often metal now, sturdy, dented, and ready to survive being dropped on a concrete floor. Tea itself is rationed, as is sugar, so what people drink varies wildly. Some have proper black tea, others brew herbal blends from dried mint, chamomile, or whatever leaves they can find. Someone's even experimenting with roasted barley tea, a trick picked up from Japanese immigrants long before the war. It's nutty, warm, and divisive. Historians still argue whether management deliberately encouraged tea breaks during this period to maintain morale or whether they simply couldn't afford to lose even a minute of production to unplanned fatigue. Either way, the breaks become little islands of calm in an otherwise militarized workday. You notice the conversations have shifted, too. Some talk about ration books and blackout curtains. Others about brothers or cousins overseas. There's a weight in these exchanges. Even when someone cracks a joke. One man says his tea is so strong it could march to Berlin, earning a round of tired chuckles. A quirky wartime adaptation emerges. Tea leaf reading. Workers, often on night shifts, start predicting the future from the patterns in their mugs. Sometimes playfully, sometimes with an eerie sincerity. One evening, A woman peers into her cup and says she sees a long journey and a quick return. And for a moment, everyone lets themselves believe it's true. The tea break room itself changes under wartime needs. Posters hang on the walls. Bold red letters urging, "Keep your eyes on victory," and "Tea saves lives. Stay alert." There's even a small donation tin for the Red Cross sitting by the sugar jar. People toss in coins when they can, even if it means one less spoonful for themselves. When the whistle blows, the return to the line is almost martial. Movements sharp, purposeful, coordinated. You can tell the tea doesn't just warm their hands now. It steals them. It's a reminder of home, of normalcy, of something human amid the machinery of war. And when the next break comes, they'll be back, mugs ready, looking for that brief, stubborn comfort in a world that's anything but peaceful. By the late 1940s, the war has ended, and the plant is humming again with civilian production. The Model T is long gone, replaced by sleeker, more powerful cars. But the assembly line still runs with that same hypnotic rhythm Henry Ford set in motion decades ago. You step onto the factory floor now, and it's almost like the place is exhaling after years of holding its breath. Tea breaks, too, have loosened up. Rationing is over, and imported teas are making a slow but steady return to the shelves. You spot workers with blends they haven't tasted in years. Full-bodied Assam, floral Darjeeling, even the occasional experimental green tea. Sugar is back, and milk flows freely again. The break room smells richer, the steam more inviting. Still, not everything reverts to the old ways. The habits forged during scarcity, like thriftiness and improvisation, stick around. Some workers keep brewing barley tea out of preference, and a few still carry their pocket tea cloths, more as a personal quirk than a necessity. Historians still argue whether this mix of old and new was a conscious cultural shift or just the natural blending of eras. The chatter is brighter now. People talk about buying new cars, saving for houses, sending kids to college. There's a post-war optimism that even the oily scent of the plant can't quite drown out. Someone jokes that the tea's so good now, they might start working slower just to stretch the break. Another swears the new electric kettles are brewing it too fast to be trustworthy. A quirky addition to the post-war tea break. Radio music. Small sets sit on the counter, crackling out swing tunes, early rock and roll, and baseball game updates. Workers hum along, tap mugs to the beat, even dance in place for a few seconds before the next shift. The break room itself has improved. Fresh paint, better lighting, sturdier chairs. Management seems to recognize that a relaxed worker is a productive one. And maybe, just maybe, they've learned that the tea break is more than just lost time. It's the glue holding the day together. You watch as the final whistle of the day blows. Mugs are emptied, radios switched off, and people file back to the line or out into the evening air. The tea break, born in the shadow of industrial speed, shaped by depression and war, has settled into something permanent, woven into the fabric of work life. And as the plant's lights flicker and dim, that's where you leave it. A simple pause in the chaos, a warm mug between calloused hands, and the quiet truth that even in a world built on speed, there's always time to stop, just for a moment. The pace slows now. Your breathing evens out, your shoulders unclench. The clatter of machinery fades into a distant hum, replaced by the gentle sound of boiling water and the faint clink of mugs on a wooden table. You picture yourself there, in a quiet corner of the break room, the air warm and still, the steam curling lazily upward. Outside, the day drifts toward evening. The light is softer now, sliding through dusty windows, laying golden stripes across the floor. You hear the low murmur of friendly conversation, slow and unhurried. The kind that doesn't need to fill every silence. Someone laughs quietly. The sound like the rustle of leaves. You take a sip from your mug. It's just the right temperature. The flavor deep and familiar. You can feel it warming you from the inside. Each swallow a little heavier than the last. The chair beneath you is steady. The air is calm, and there's nowhere else you need to be. In the corner, the kettle clicks off. A faint breeze slips through the open door, carrying the faintest trace of something sweet. Time feels stretched here, loose and forgiving. You let your eyes close. The voice is fading into a soft blur. The steam from your tea rises and rises, until it becomes the clouds in your dreams.